Dharma friends, yesterday in our text, we ended in English here, I have it on page 34 on the bottom. So by settling within the essence of practice. And so never separating from practice. And today in the next page, then we continue. At death, it is not necessary to recognize or identify the dissolution stages of whiteness, blackness, and so forth. Merely sustain the essence of whatever arises. Before we come to the Bardo, and also in the context of recognizing dreams, we speak about the dissolution of dissolution stages of whiteness, redness, and blackness. And normally we speak about these in the context of dying, but it doesn't only happen when we die. It happens every time we fall asleep. And those who recognize the dream state will probably also recognize the dissolution. So, for example, in Tibetan, they have this saying of when you're falling down from somewhere high, and then you hit your head. Then they say, my brain went into whiteness and redness and so on. So they say it casually like that, but it's because this whiteness first appears. So when we fall asleep, so how it happens every day when we fall asleep, first we fall asleep and then we also go through a whiteness and redness and blackness. And after the blackness, then there's a dream. We dream mainly the imprints of the daytime state are experienced during that dream. And then the sensation of dreaming also stops. And so then one really falls asleep, and then there is this kind of blissful experience to whiteness. So the whiteness is connected to a blissful experience. For example, we feel like we want to sleep. We feel good when we sleep. That is related to the whiteness. And actually, it doesn't only happen in sleep, it also happens at daytime. So we fall asleep, and then we go to, when we reach, for some actually, it happens very quickly, that the whiteness and the blackness almost occurred together. And then there's many different levels for blackness too. There's like a pitch blackness and all kinds of forms of blackness. And then after that, one comes to the deep sleep state. So after the dream, then one comes to the deep sleep state. So for those who recognize the dream state, that might be easier. But those who have not trained in dreaming, then here in the text it says that there is no need to train in it. So it isn't necessary. What this is to say is that one should sustain awareness no matter what arises, no matter what appears. The mind should remain unmoving from the practice. One should not analyze whatever arises, whatever thought arises. And normally when we practice meditation, we talk about do not grasp at whatever thought arises. Then thoughts are liberated upon arising. If we do not analyze the thoughts, they dissipate like waves on water. But the moment you follow a single thought, the thought grows bigger. It is just like first you have a small wave, and then that small wave develops into a bigger and bigger wave until you have a huge wave. Those thoughts are just like that. So when you meditate and thoughts arise, do not analyze those thoughts. Then they will disappear just like a wave on water. So once when Milarepa had a conversation with his disciple Bardo, she said, when she came back reporting, she said that when I meditate on the ocean, so he told her to meditate on the ocean, the mind like an ocean, she said, that makes me feel uncomfortable because then the waves arise. And then Milarepa instructed her the waves are just the play of the ocean. They're not separate from the ocean. Similarly, the clouds are the play of the sky. They're not separate from the sky. So he gave her this instruction. So then when she understood that the mind is just like that. It is just like an ocean or the sky, and the thoughts are like waves or clouds. And if you don't analyze them, if you just let them be, then actually there's actually no need. It's not necessary to train, to like deliberately practice the whiteness, blackness, and so forth. So then it says, when the outer breath has ceased, the body of the deceased should be attentively robed in funerary Dharma attire. They are then instructed by the assistant not to be distracted from the meditative state. So it is said that especially those lamas, the spiritual teachers, they have a Dharma robe, and they have received this Dharma robe. They have like a vow, as a Maya, in relation to that. And so then they have an attendant, like an assistant, who robes them in this attire. So these Dharma robes, for example, the Kempo's Dharma robes, always with them. They're supposed to always have the robe with them, because they possess many blessings from their own guru, and with whom they have samaya. And so at that time, there are some of those gurus who sit in a meditative posture when they pass away, or in the Dzogchen tradition also we speak about the lying down on the right side, like when the Buddha passed away. So there's different ways, different postures at the time of death. But whether one is lying down or sitting up straight, this master should be covered in his Dharma robes that he had. And then also there's, for example, a mantrika, a layperson, a lay vow holder. Then they would wear their robe. They would be covered with their robe by the assistant, and, for example, have their Dharma wheel, their prayer wheel at the pillow. And then it says, when the outer breath has ceased. This is usually when we say somebody has actually died. But then, when the outer breath has ceased, the inner breath has not yet ceased. And so at this time, the assistant, one should then tell the dying person, do not be distracted. So if the dying person is an ordinary person, then we will tell them, now the time of death has come. Do not forget about the Buddha Amitabha. And then you can recite this supplication, homage to Amitabha. I prostrate to the Tathagata, the perfectly complete Buddha, the Arhat, the Buddha Amitabha, this prayer. And then you can also recite the prayer of Sukhavati or have it play on the recording. And when they hear these words, then the meaning of those words will appear in their mind. Because at that time of death, there is no concept of I'm not a Buddhist or I'm a Buddhist. No, at the time of death, all these concepts of Buddhist, not Buddhist, of I am, and so on, all these concepts are absent. And so at that time, one should recite to them the mantra of a Buddha and supplication and so forth. And that is because their Buddha nature, they are receptive because they possess Buddha nature, which is fundamentally pure. We are only temporarily obscured. So temporarily, when we are alive, we say, I'm like a Muslim or I'm a Christian, I'm not a Buddhist, and so on. But all of these are just temporary, momentary concepts. But Buddha nature remains unchanging. And so therefore, no matter who they are, even if they're not necessarily a Buddhist, speak to them about love and compassion and have them hear a mantra and so on. And especially if they have a faith and trust to a certain guru, then you can say that guru's name and say that that guru is here, he's with you, and don't be distracted, and so on. And so if one is an ordinary person, according to the Buddhist tradition, for example, there is like a blanket that we cover the body with. It's called liberation by touch. They're produced also in Taiwan and China. It's very popular. And the body is covered with that. It contains a mantra, a liberation mantra that is printed onto it. And so it is said that through the power of this mantra, then the wind mind will enter the central channel. And so the top part is at the throat. So it is kind of bound by the kata, also at the, like a scarf at the throat. And then one should place a dharma pill, like a blessing pill, under the tongue of the person, and also some sand from a sand mandala onto their crown. It is said that then if one does that, then this person will not take birth in the 3 lower realms. And that is mainly a quality of the channels in the body. In the body, there are pure and impure channels. And this is the quality of the pure central channel. And so if it is a family that is not Buddhist, doesn't have any devotion to the Dharma, and that a person is dying, so what is very harmful is if the relatives and the friends and so on, if they pretend that they love the person, maybe they don't really love them that much, but as they are crying and pretending that they love them, so don't do that. That's really very harmful. That's actually harms the attainment of liberation. And even if you really love them, still you shouldn't cry, and you shouldn't say like, don't die, don't leave us, and don't cry. And especially it should not be done at the lower part of the body. So there's a big difference where you stand, the higher part, like the upper part, the crown part of the body, or the lower part of the body. Now, if you stand there at the feet of the person, at the lower part of the body, and you cry, don't leave, and so on, even if you love them, the attention goes to the lower part of the body, the lower doors, and the consciousness then might leave through the 3 lower doors, and then they take birth in the 3 lower realms. So if they leave through the navel opening, then they take birth as an animal. If they leave through the anal tract, they take birth in hell. And if they leave through the urinary tract, then they take birth as a hungry spirit. So that causes a lot of harm for their consciousness. So stand at their pillow, at their pillow level, and with great love, you can tell them, "I love you and I'm there," but you don't want to lament and cry. And so naturally, then when you are there, and then the attention of the person is directed to the upper part of the body, where we have the 3 doors of the higher realms, then the consciousness naturally goes there, and then leaves through the doors of either gods, humans, or demigods. So there's a big difference in terms of where you actually are physically present at the time of death. And that is very important. And what's very important, again, is the liberation by touching. That's very important. And we also have them printed on other things like the wristband and so on. So have that on them, and remind them of the Buddha Amitabha and the mantra. Then just naturally they will take birth in the higher realms. And here it doesn't matter So their mind and wind will then naturally enter the central channel. And it doesn't matter what kind of person that is, what kind of like race that person has, or what kind of religion that person has. It doesn't matter. But what's important is that the person helping them has a good motivation and has love and compassion for them. Then it is much more powerful. So there's many different levels in terms of the intention, higher, middling, and lower, and so on. And also in terms of helping them. But even if you don't have any of those various objects and so forth, at least be at their pillow level, at their higher part of their body, and don't cry on the lower part of their body. And if you have a prayer wheel or some other kind of special thing like a blessing, then you can place that above the pillow of that person, so the person has an awareness of there is this like prayer wheel there and so forth, and then remind them with love that it is that I'm there, I love you, and do not be distracted. So that is fine to say, but at the ground level. So this is a very important point, and so again, it is related to the quality of the channels. So a few words on the mandala sand, the sand that comes from sand mandalas. That is very significant for a person who is dying, and it's also something that many lamas are distributing. So it is extremely precious. And so there are 6 kinds of liberation, such as liberation by touch and liberation by seeing, or liberation by covering, and then the sand would be liberation by touch, and a stupa, for example, is liberation by recollection, and so on. And so through these kinds of liberation, we are liberated from birth in the 3 lower realms. And this among this sand mandala sand, a special sand, for example, is also distributed by our center in Singapore and many other lamas. For example, in 79, there were 3 main places like Dashilumbo and so on, where these sand mandalas were consecrated and then thereafter distributed. So they come from sacred sites where they are consecrated and then distributed. So there are some who actually spend their entire lives creating the sand mandalas and consecrating them. So it is a very special practice, and therefore the sand that comes is extremely precious. So this is now from how it is precious from the relative perspective. And in this way, it is distributed by our Singapore Center and many other lamas. From the ultimate perspective, how it is precious is that the oceans, the world oceans, are naturally actually permeated by the blessings of the mandala sands, because it is said that all the blessings, all the Buddhist blessings, are present in the snowy land of Tibet, and these blessings are then taken by the lamas and by the great bodhisattvas of Tibet, who add them to the waters there. And then since all waters converge with the world oceans, the oceans in the world, all the blessings also naturally go there and permeate the oceans. So therefore, all the blessings are contained within the oceans. And so therefore, this sand from the relative or the ultimate perspective is extremely precious. Or, for example, it can be taken to a cemetery, like a charnel ground, and cast into the wind there. And it is said that whoever is then touched by the wind, which is all the beings there, their karmic imprints will become purified. Their confused perceptions will become purified through the blessings of the mandala sand. Mainly it is their self-grasping that becomes purified. through the power that is contained in the sand really is the Buddha's bodhicitta, and also the love and compassion of the one who casts it. And so here we come to the three powers. This is the power, the first power, the power of your own motivation, your motivation of love and compassion. Then there is the second power of all the Buddha's great compassion. So that is that within this sand, the compassion, the bodhicitta of all the Buddhas and the gurus of the past who have consecrated this sand for hundreds of years, that is also contained. And then there is the power of the Dharma Dhatu, which is that all sentient beings possess Buddha nature fundamentally. And on that level, there is no division between I'm Buddhist, I'm not Buddhist, I'm me, that's him. There is no difference between I'm a Sakya, I'm a Gelugpa, and so on. All of these labels are just thoughts. But all of that does not exist in Buddha nature. There's only one Buddha nature, and that is the cause of awakening. So that is the power of the Dharma Dhatu. And due to this power, it can become very easy for the Bardo consciousness. Very easily their obscurations can become purified. So that is why this sand, this special sand, is very important and very precious. It can be put on the bones of a person who has deceased, or it can be applied on the crown of a person who is alive. It can be used for cleansing rituals and so forth. So it is very, very precious. And then there's also the mani pills, the blessing pills that we distribute. They're given they have different names in different lineages. So there's the mani pills in the Jigong Kagyu, and the Chakdur in the Sakya, and Ratna in the Nyingma, and in the Drukpa. Anyways, then there's in the Drukpa, they have the mani pills. And the pills those precious pills are a liberation, a tasting. So in Gar Monastery, we have those mani pills. And then also we have the Gyanagma prayer wheel. And ever since the time, actually 8 generations ago, Changme Raga Asya, together with Gar Denzin Punsok, 8 generations ago, so the first Gar Rinpoche started this practice of consecrating the mani pills, and ever since, and also for 24 hours a day, the Gyanagma prayer wheel is turning, and then we take the butter that is used to grease the prayer wheel as a blessing continuously. So these are 2 practices done in Gargan continuously. Taking the butter, the balm from the prayer wheel, and also the consecration of the mani pills. So many of the past masters in the transmission lineage have continued to consecrate these at one monastic seat of Gar Monastery for 8 generations, and have produced different forms of liberation. For example, there's the liberation by tasting, which is placed into one's mouth, or liberation by like covering the body, or liberation by touch, like the sand, and so forth. There's different methods of liberation. And so especially those 2 things nowadays, the mani pills and the butter that comes from the prayer wheel, is something that we offer to others as much as we can, according to their needs. So then when the outer breath has ceased and so forth, so one has placed the blessings into their mouth and on all of that, and then the outer breath has ceased. So they're not breathing any longer. The last breath is an exhalation out, a long exhalation out, but one isn't able to inhale once again. So this is what we call the outer breath has ceased. And at that time, the consciousness is very clear. So then it says here, the disappearing blackness is called the ground luminosity. It is said to be like a cloud-free sky, like a completely strikingly clear sky that appears early in the morning before the sun rises. There is this sky that is without sun, without moon, without clouds, a completely clear sky, a bluish sky. And that is like the Dharmakaya space. So at this point, the outer space and the inner mind are merging. Milarepa had said, mind and space are not distinct. So when one has habituated to this in one's lifetime, then this is what will happen at this point naturally. So that means a person who in their lifetime have recognized the view, the natural state of the mind, have recognized the space-like state of the mind, at this time, it will happen naturally. The mind will naturally merge with space. So there's nothing that needs to be done actually at that point. The mind will naturally merge with Dharmakaya. And merging with Dharmakaya, merging with space, then actually there is no more need for like a meditative state after death and so on, because one has already merged with Dharmakaya. Then it says, it is said to be like a cloud-free sky wherein a naked essence will appear with striking clarity. So it will appear in the same way as it appears right now, according to our present recognition while we are alive. So the essence, here is the essence, the nature of one's mind. And naked means the mind that is without any thought. So at that point of death, it will appear exactly in the same way as it appears now in our meditation. So then it says, the recognition of the essence itself at this time, an entrance into that state is given the name dwelling in the meditative state. So then remaining within this, abiding within this state of meditation is referred to as dwelling in the meditative state. And so sometimes the body of the deceased master, for example, sits upright. So they have this freedom to sit in a meditative posture after death. And then it says, since the mind is very powerful during the death process, the longer one remains within this state of recognition, the more powerful the fulfillment of the aspirations and commitments one has taken will be. Therefore, at the time of death, take a firm commitment and think that I will remain within this state for as long as I can. So that refers to the commitment that one takes. So if one knows how to meditate, then one takes a commitment that when I die, I am going to stay within the meditative state for as long as I can. So you're taking this commitment to yourself, and then through the power of this commitment, it will naturally happen. So it will naturally, this commitment will naturally be fulfilled. And then as a result of this commitment, one becomes liberated from samsara. So for example, when you practice recognizing the dream state, when you go to sleep, then you can take a commitment of, I am going to wake up exactly at that time. So often when we do that, when we are determined to wake up at a certain time, then we naturally wake up exactly at that time. So this is also how we can practice on kind of an ongoing basis. And then later at the time of death, then one may take a commitment of remaining with that after death, I'm going to remain within the meditative state for 7 days if it is longer, or 3 days if it is shorter, and so on for however long one takes the commitment. Then the commitment is there, then the commitment, through the power of the commitment, this aspiration will be fulfilled. Then it says, but if after having first practiced the transference of consciousness, you cannot sustain a meditative state that does not become disbanded by conditions, do not transfer the consciousness from anywhere else but the crown. So this is also the point of practicing POA, or the transference of consciousness, on an ongoing basis. Because if you train in POA beforehand, then the mind wind will already be in the central channel, kind of waiting there to go. So it's ready to go. It's already there. So at the time of death, it's ready to go. And that's the benefit of practicing POA on an ongoing basis. Because if due to various conditions at the time of death, one is not able to sustain this meditative state, then at least there is no worries, but because one is already ready to go, one will naturally leave through the crown. So there are many practitioners among you who always practice POA. And it's also a practice of the 6 yogas of Naropa that also many practice. And so it says there, it speaks about the quality of the mind wind abiding at the navel. So not just at the heart, the way in which it is often practiced, but also there's a great quality in having the winds abide at the navel, because that is where there is the opening to the central channel. So the central channel extends from the secret chakra up to the crown chakra, and just below the navel is said to be the royal seat of all the wind energies. And so there are different visualizations to the POA practice, and often people visualize at the heart, but it's actually not just at the heart. There's a very important point of the wind energies and the mind to abide at the navel, to visualize the hong at the navel. This actually was also an instruction by Milarepa that he gave when Marpa San Dhammadota had died. And so then Milarepa gave Marpa gave this instruction, and then Milarepa had said that when one meditates on the hong, when one thinks of the navel, there is no need for any other POA. He says that the mind and the winds all abide within the navel chakra, and so that is really the heart essence. So visualizing in the context of POA, focusing the attention at the navel, is a very important point that might be very beneficial for the disciples. So then it says, by visualizing your body as the yidam, you will stabilize the meditative state. So I mean, it's very beneficial to therefore visualize yourself as a yidam again and again, because then later in the Bardo, you arise as the yidam deity. And so for that, it's most important to have trust and faith in the yidam, that the mindfulness of the yidam is undistracted.
다 참이 거기서는데 나도 제대로 셔만 명지 나 셔만 명지 저도 시해요 그래 나도 제대로 셔만 명 랑당 잡은 지로라 산데부터 세바에 통담 땡보선 바당 당지 토도 좋아 통지 이제 지로 탐지 됐다 냠니 세바라더니 답도 토도 좋아당 진짜 다람으로더니 통송송.
And so then there are words by Kamachama himself, a few lines down. As for me, I've never died in this life. So that's what also I'm saying. And then, but Dharma friends who, like myself, visualize in this way, will sustain their meditative state with stability and see their commitments achieved. So, however, if others do engage in the practice as described, they will attain stability and see their commitments achieved. Many times have I witnessed the arrival of holy relics and excellent signs after death, so I know this to be true. This description of the meditative state of the innately unified transference of consciousness stems from the teachings of the peerless Gampopa. He himself had seen many times the appearance of relics and so forth at the time of death, and so therefore he's confident that if someone practices while they are alive with bodhicitta, then such are the qualities that may arise then. So regarding the Bardo, there's also a very important point. So what is the Bardo then? So when somebody who goes into the Bardo, when somebody has good practice, they might become liberated in the Bardo as Dharmakaya or Sambhogakaya, and they don't go into the actual Bardo then. So there's two kinds of individuals who don't go into the Bardo. One kind on either side of the spectrum. On the one side, like those who are very high, on the higher end of the spectrum, they are liberated already in the Dharmakaya or Sambhogakaya. And then the other kind is on the other side of the spectrum, somebody who is extremely negative, extremely evil, has no devotion, no trust in karma whatsoever. So for them, it is that there's also no Bardo. They go very directly into the lower realms. But then there is like sinful people like myself. I have great sin. However, I also have devotion to the three jewels, and therefore I don't have too many doubts. But now here we're speaking about the one with the greatest negativity. Someone who doesn't believe in karma, for example. Kamacharma said also in the prayer of Sukhavati, there's those who say that virtue has no benefit and non-virtue has no shortcoming and so on. So it is those, for example, who say there is no past and future lives. Life is just like a flower that's withering and so on. And then they really believe in that. So that is the most difficult case, the greatest negativity, the lower end of the spectrum. And they will go directly to the lower realms, and nobody can liberate them. Nobody can help them because there is no real Bardo for them. And then there's the majority who has like a mixture of virtue and non-virtue. And generally, the time span one spends in the Bardo is said to be 49 days. But even that actually is not so certain. Because, for example, if somebody dies an untimely death, that is before their destined lifespan has been exhausted, if they die before that, then they have to remain in the Bardo for the remainder of their lifespan, for however long that is. So it is actually uncertain. So actually it is something, the Bardo is also something that science has to some level observed. Like last year, there was some discussion about the transference of consciousness and the dissolution stages of whiteness and so on until there's blackness. And there is like elements of that science really has recognized. That's very similar. And so in any case, there is this kind of individual who will remain in the Bardo until the remainder of their lifespan is exhausted. And so then for them who remain in the Bardo, the virtue that we practice for them is very significant. Any kind of virtue, such as like dedicating for them and cultivating bodhicitta and making prayers for them and so on, that will help them very swiftly in the Bardo. So the ordinary person spends about 49 days in the Bardo, and that is why we practice. It is very important to practice dedications and prayers for 49 days for those who have passed away. And then after this time has elapsed, then one takes birth anywhere, either in the Pure Lands or in the lower realms and so forth. But generally one stays those 49 days. And then there's many others who stay much longer, especially if they have experienced an untimely death. And then there's also those Bardo consciousness who become hungry spirits in the Bardo. So then they become these sky faring hungry spirits, and often they remain within that state even for thousands of years. So the time we spend in the Bardo is actually uncertain. And then it says, anyone can surely practice the method of the lowest, the ultimate low, regardless of whether or not they can sustain a meditative state, whether or not they have succeeded in the transference of consciousness, or whether or not they have recognized the assembly of peaceful and wrathful deities in the Bardo. When over 2 weeks have passed since you have died and you recognize near the end of the 3rd week that you have died, your clairvoyant and miraculous abilities are unobstructed. At that time, even though you possess great freedom over where you may travel, your mind, due to being attached to country, relatives, dharma friends, and so on, becomes distressed. You may therefore begin to think, I shall take on a human body at this place and practice the true Dharma. Because if I won't take on a body quickly, the messengers of the Lord of Death will come and get me. Since I have to follow virtues and non-virtues karma, things won't turn out good. So then these words are quite straightforward. But so in the Bardo, one experiences clairvoyant power. So one possesses there's 6 kinds of clairvoyances, and then 5 kinds of memory and so forth. So when, in brief, without listing them all, when you're alive and you receive empowerments and transmissions and so forth, often people say, I haven't understood a thing. So they have received the empowerment, but they didn't really understand anything, although they do have devotion. And because they have devotion, they have faith. Even though they haven't understood a thing when they receive the empowerment, then later in the Bardo, because the consciousness is very clear, possesses these clairvoyant abilities, one will remember the meaning of the empowerment, and one will understand the meaning of the empowerment at that point due to those clairvoyant abilities. So there are 6 kinds of clairvoyances due to the 6 sense doors and so on. And so then also due to one's heightened awareness in the Bardo, then also the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities will appear. So when you have, when you possess the freedom over where to go at that time, so there's an important point here. And so that is, now at that point, whatever you think of, whatever comes to your mind, this is where you will go to instantly. So the consciousness after death is driven there by the wind of karma, which is then just like a bird's feather being blown by the wind. You have no control, no freedom over where it will bring you. It depends on your afflictive emotions. So, so even though you have freedom, is that whatever you think of, that's where you will go. But then in your lifetime, if you are controlled, if you're used to being controlled by the afflictive emotions of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, then these karmic winds will take you naturally, also in the Bardo. So how does it happen right now? For example, now when you're alive and a strong afflictive emotion arises, for example, you get very angry, then you instantly recognize, oh, I'm angry, this is not good, I must not fight with anyone. Because if I fight, I become controlled. If you become controlled by the anger, for example, if it's with you and a friend, you have been friends your entire life, you have loved each other for your entire life, and then due to some small thing that happens one day, you get angry at each other, and then you separate and create a lot of suffering the rest of your life. So these are the karmic winds that also occur in this life. And so then, in order to not become controlled by these karmic winds in the Bardo, first you have to recognize with clear awareness all the subtle and coarse thoughts and afflictive emotions that arise now in your mind. So you recognize, I'm afflicted, there's an afflictive emotion. And no matter what the other person has done, if I become controlled by this afflictive emotion, then later, after I have died, I will also become controlled by my anger in the Bardo. And if I am controlled by anger in the Bardo, then I will go to hell instantly. Because in the Bardo, whatever arises in the mind will bring you there instantly. So if anger arises, then you have already created hell, and it will already ripen instantly. So therefore, it is through having a very deep trust in karma, cause and effect, that you will be able to now avoid becoming controlled by the afflictive emotions. So the point is to cultivate trust in karma, and to recognize that if I'm controlled now, I will be controlled later. So therefore, Dzogchen Sumgön also had said, as you mentioned before, that it is the certainty that you have gained in karma that determines whether you are a good or a bad Dharma practitioner. So even if you haven't really studied the Buddhist scriptures and so on for much, if you really trust in karma, then that is sufficient. Dzogchen Sumgön also had said that cause and effect is the natural expression of the moment-to-moment thoughts. For example, a human being and an insect, like an ant, have different causes. Therefore, they appear in different ways. So this is how you develop trust in karma. And so therefore, if you are able to control your afflictive emotions now, then you will also be able to control them in the Bardo. So then it says, so I shall take on, so then you think I shall take on a human body at this place and practice the Dharma, because if not, then the messengers of the Lord of Death will come and get me. And so no one may have that wish, the intention of taking on birth as a human being and then practicing the Dharma again and so on. But then it is due to the karma one has accumulated that the messengers of the Lord of Death, of Yama, will come and get one, and so then determine one's place of birth. So it is just like there is this time where these messengers will kind of present one, kind of whatever good one has done, whatever bad one has done. And so basically, what this means is that it will all appear to one. All the things one has done, it will appear to one. And so therefore, if one, in order to obtain a precious human body, most importantly, one in one's lifetime must have practiced ethical discipline, or disciplined conduct. And mainly within that, it is to have not committed sexual misconduct. If one has the fault of sexual misconduct, one does not obtain a precious human body. So, for example, also there are stories about when one has a strong attachment, for example, towards one's wife, and so on. Then there are many stories of how one takes birth as like a kind of a life form, like an insect in that person's body, but one does not obtain a precious human body due to the fault of being attached. And so there are many stories of how, due to attachment, one takes birth at the place, within the object of one's attachment. in my home place, there were some masters with clairvoyant powers, and they could see things like that. Like, for example, a person who was very attached to their money, their riches, then after the person has died, he took birth as an insect, an animal, close to all those riches. And then this animal can actually be seen. So that happens when one is extremely attached to something or someone. And so then when the messages of death come, it is not something like kind of like a judgment where they say you have committed sexual misconduct and so on, but it's more what arises in your own mind. There's like doubts that begin to arise within one's own mind. It all appears, everything that you have done. So all the negative things you have done appear. You see all the things you have done, and then fear arises and doubts arise. And then that is why the consciousness goes there. And then likewise for all meritorious actions like generosity and ethical conduct and patience, it all arises. So again, the main cause of taking birth as a human being is ethical conduct. But then even if one has that fault of having transgressed that, if one hasn't always practiced ethical conduct, it is also said that, for example, if one practices a single Nyungne practice just a single time, but very well, then as a result, one obtains a precious human body. So then one may be born as a precious human body, but then amongst human, there are many different kinds of human incarnations too. So these messengers of the Lord of Death are really the doubts and the fears which then arise within one's own mind. You remember, oh, I have done this, I did this. And it is clear to you at that point that this was not good. And so then doubts arise and fear arises. So what is going to happen to me then? I'm going to hell and so on. So then these doubts arise in the mind. And if, for example, there was a lot of anger, it leads to birth in the hell realm and so on. So what arises here as these messengers and so on really is one's own karmic imprints, one's own mind appearing to one. So therefore, it is so important to not be attached, to not cling. It is also said in Changmei's prayer of Sukhavati. Therefore, one should pray single-pointedly to be born in the Pure Land. By just thinking about it, one will be born there. And so then, so therefore, single-pointedly, one thinks, may I be born in the Pure Land. But still, it is then due to one's attachment to the things in one's life, one takes on an evil incarnation. That it's really like the state of one's mind of attachment, and then as a result, one experiences suffering. So therefore, one should single-pointedly turn one's mind away from that. So therefore, what is important is that clear awareness is not lost. The stability of clear awareness is not lost. It is important that awareness attains autonomy. And then this can be accomplished. So now, Dharma friends, please take a rest.
Oh, Mani, baby, oh, Mani, baby.